Hello, my name is Beth Dixon, and I work in MBSS 222 in the Math and Behavioral Social Science building. And I am the Math Lab coordinator, and it is my job to help you through your math courses here at Walter State. And I am recording a set of lessons on factoring, and this is factoring part 4, and it's factoring trinomials. And these are the shortcut methods, especially for those problems that have a 1x squared. And so these are trial and error methods. And so if your teacher has used other methods, you want to probably go back and review the factoring part 3A and 3B especially. And I've kind of assumed as I've gone through these lessons, I had to kind of prepare them in a certain order. So I've kind of assumed that you know how to factor by grouping, and that's kind of where I've started from. So it's probably a good thing that you watch all of the lessons. For those of you that do it strictly by trial and error, that is where we're headed for some of these. So you'll be okay too, but you probably want to watch those factoring by grouping. It won't hurt you a bit, I promise. And it won't confuse you in the long run. I make that promise as well. Or if it does, I promise you, if you come by, we'll get you straightened out. Come by to the math lab. Let's start by looking at x squared plus 5x plus 6. And let's talk about how we're going to factor it. In our factoring trinomials part 3A and B, we talked about how we'd want to multiply the first and last terms and get 6, and how it had to be something that multiplied to be 6, but that added to be 5. And it added because that last term was positive. And because that last term was positive, both signs had to be the same. So in this case, we know the only factors of 6 are 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. In this case, we know then that 2 and 3 are the options or the choices that we want, because they're the choices that add to give me 5x. And what we really have, and again, I'm using the factoring by grouping to explain this, but for those of you that use trial and error, we're going to get to trial and error, so just hang on, even if this first part's just a little confusing to you. We get 2x plus 3x plus 6. Because basically I want to show you where we're getting our answers from for those of you that just do trial and error. For those of you that do grouping, I want to show you how we can shortcut our grouping and go straight to the answers. Now, we know this because if that last term's positive, we want to make sure that our signs are both the same as that middle term, because 2x plus 3x gives me 5x, and then it makes that pattern that we know that holds true, which is 1x squared times 6 is 6x squared, and 2x times 3x is 6x squared. So that pattern that we know must hold true is holding true. Now we're going to factor by grouping, which we see the first two terms share an x, and the last two terms share a 3. This is the step that those that factor by trial and error don't normally do, but that's okay, because you're going to get to this step right here, which now I want to stop and look at. Okay, as we stop and look at this, what I want you to see is that notice that we get the x plus 2, x plus 3, and we'll get it every time. We don't really have to go through this process because the x's, because it's an x squared, we'll always just get x and x here. Because when we multiply our first terms, that's how we get our x squared. There's no other number there because it's not the complicated ones with the 2x squares, and sometimes it divides up and does some strange things. We'll always just get x and x here. And whatever numbers we put here, notice that just factors out an x there every time, leaves me the x there every time, and that gives us x plus 2. Whatever's common there is going to be common there and gives me that 3, and our answer is just going to be x plus 2, x plus 3. So we can look here and go straight from here to there, watching those rules of signs that we were talking about in lessons 3A and 3B on factoring. Now listen to those, go listen to those. Okay, let's look at the next one. And we're not going to do factoring by grouping anymore with these. We're going to go straight to the answers by looking at the 14. Okay, 14. Possibilities are 1 and 14, 2 and 7. Those are the only pairs of numbers that multiply to be 14. Our rule of signs says when the last term is positive, we want to add to be the middle term, and the both signs have to be the same as the middle term. Okay, well 2 and 7 then will add to be 9, and they both need to be negative. So we're going to draw our two parentheses. To get the x, we'll put an x there and an x there. That's going to be a minus 2 and a minus 7. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to check it to see if it's right. X times x is x squared. Do my outside, which would be minus 7x. My inside, which would be minus 2x. And my last, which would be negative 2 times negative 7, which is positive 14x. X squared minus 9x plus 14. It matches. So my check, let's see that I wrote check there. So my check indicates that it is correct. Okay, this is my answer. This down here is just my check. And so my answer is x minus 2, x minus 7. Okay, let's look at my next one. Okay, in this case I have a negative 12. Notice I'm going to keep my negative sign on these. Sometimes when it's positive I won't remember it, but if it's a negative I always bring it over to help me remember. My possibilities are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. As I write my factors down, I always start with 1 and I start counting up from 1. 1 goes into 12 12 times, 2 goes into 12 6 times, 3 goes into 12 4 times. After 3 comes 4. Well, 4 is on my list, so I know I'm done. And that's how I count up. If you want some more help with finding those factors, come in and we'll talk more about how to do that. And I think on one of these I'll even show you how to do it on the calculator. These are real nice and short and sweet. We're going to subtract to be 1. Because it's negative, where the signs have to be opposite. We get one sign of each. Well, 12 minus 1 is 11. 6 minus 2 is 4. 4 minus 3 is 1. So it's going to be the 4 and the 3. And the rules for our signs are that when our last term is negative, then the signs of the factors have one sign of each, and the stronger one, which is going to be 4, will match the middle. So it'll be a negative, and the 3 will be positive. So that 3 times 4 equals a negative 12, but 3 plus negative 4 gives me that negative x. So I draw my parentheses, put my x, then it's going to be plus 3 minus 4. So that if I check it, and again I'm going to check this one, x squared plus 3x minus 4x, negative 12. They multiply to give me that negative 12, but that inside and outside term then add to give me negative 1x. So you see why they have to multiply to give me negative 12, but then add to be that middle term. And let me go over the rules for the signs again as we look at this. Let's do the negative one first, since that's the one we just talked about. If that last term is negative, then the signs of those factors, these are the factors, okay, we'll have one sign of each, with the stronger number, which is the larger absolute value, matching the middle term. So the 4 matches the middle term. When that last term is positive, they'll both have the sign of the middle term. If that last term is positive, then both signs will have the sign of the middle term. And the second is talking about how to do it when it's using factoring by grouping. Okay, let's look at some additional examples. We've got negative 6, so that means it can be 1 times 6 or 2 times 3. Because it's negative, we're going to think subtract. So 3 minus 2 is 1, 6 minus 1 is 5. Notice 2 and 3 add to be 5, but we're not adding. Our signs have to be different because that last term is a negative. So it's the 1 and the 6 that add. And the sign in the middle goes with the larger number, and the 1 gets to be negative. So we draw our 2 parentheses, put our x's in the front, we get a minus 1 and a positive 6. And if we check it, we get x squared minus 1x plus 6x minus 6. Negative 1 times 6 is negative 6. Negative 1x plus 6x gives me 5x, and there it checks. Now notice this one right here looks the same, but it's got a plus 6. So we want to add to be 5 this time, so we're going to choose the 2 and the 3. And because it's a positive, both signs will be the same as the middle. And if we checked it, x squared, and I'm going to move that up. You can't see both checks at once, but x squared plus 2x plus 3x plus 6. And there's that one checks because this time both signs are the same and we'll add to keep the middle term. So notice and contrast the two problems there. Okay, let's look at this example here in negative 18. And with the negative 18, let me go back and just show you on how to put this in your calculator. We want to press y equals, then type in negative 18 divide x, second table, which is above the word graph there, the second to either get to the blue or yellow, depending on which calculator you have. And we're looking for factors of 18 that subtract to give me 3. And remember, I put the negative in, so the signs will already be different. And I need a positive 3. So we'll just go down the list. Oh, right there it is. Whoops, y'all can't see that. Move it back down here. And a positive 6 and a negative 3. 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. And remember that the larger term has to match the middle. So since my middle is a positive, the 6 has to be positive, the 3 has to be negative. Draw your 2 parentheses, x minus 3 plus 3. Negative 3 times 6 is a negative 18. Negative 3x plus 6x gives me a positive 3x. Okay, let's look at two last examples. And these both have a common factor. So we have to remember to check for those common factors. In this case, there's a common factor of 2. So factor out the common factor of 2 first. Always factor your common factor of 2. I'm going to draw myself a little arrow to remember not to forget the 2. As I then ignore it as I factor the rest of it. What are the factors of 20? Again, you can use the calculator. I'm just going to write down the factors of 20. And which one adds to be 9 is 4 and 5. And they'll both get the sign of the middle term, which is a negative. So I'll draw my two parentheses, x here, minus 4, minus 5, and bring down the 2 so I didn't forget it. Then down here, the common factor is 3, x squared minus 3x minus 10. Then the factors of 10 would be 1 and 10, and 2 and 5. I need to subtract to give myself the 10, so that would be the 2 and the 5. The larger one needs to go with the negative, and that means I've got down the 3, x, positive 2, minus 5, and everything matches up and works that way. Now, these work this way because there is a 1x squared. So if we do not have a 1x squared, we need to either do some trial by factoring by trial and error, or the factoring by grouping. And I've done the factoring by grouping in the lessons 3A and B. And so I want you to go watch those and see if that works for you. And if you have some additional questions on how to do this factoring, where the x squared has a 1 in front of it, or whether we factored out and then the x squared has a 1 in front of it, please come by and see us in room 222 in the Math and Behavioral Social Science building. And I hope this has been helpful. And if you need additional questions answered, please feel free to come and see us.